All right. So at the beginning of each workshop, it's my understanding that we take some time to recognize a holy person in our community. The person who is going to introduce Mary Elizabeth Lang isn't here, so I will do my best. So they were going to describe how their parish, St. Anne's in Baltimore, is currently doing a letter writing campaign to Pope Francis for the Saintly Six, which are 6 African Americans on their way to sainthood. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I would find someone from Pax Christi running around at the conference and try to see if you can get some more information. So, yeah.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. That sounds weird. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Racial Wealth and Income Gap Workshop. It might have had a little bit of a different title in the program, but if you're here, welcome. We're very excited to be able to share this workshop and have you all participate in this interactive activity today as well. So as a quick logistics note before we start, once again, we will need everyone in groups of 4, and it looks like we mainly have folks in that way, but you will be splitting up and using these little pouches that are on your table. I think I'll have to get a pouch to the group in the back, but you'll be using these for the interactive portion. Real quick, how does the microphone sound? Is it too tinny?
It's a little fuzzy.
But if we talk loudly, can everyone? No. You can't hear me?
I can hear you, but I haven't heard you talk louder.
It's tinny, but we can still understand you perfectly.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
I'll try
we'll
like
adjust.
this, and if we need the microphone, I'll switch it out.
No, they need the microphone in the back. I'm just saying, even with the tinniness in the mic, we can still understand you. Yeah.
I'll speak slowly, that way we
No,
can
you're
hear
not.
well. But all right. So we're going to begin with our Racial Wealth and Income Gap Workshop. But with that, first, I'll quick introduction. My name is Colin Martinez-Longmore. I'm the Outreach and Education Specialist at Network Lobby, and I'm here with my colleague.
And my name is Audrey Carroll. I am the Communications Specialist at Network Lobby, so handling our press and social media. Great to be here with you today.
Yay, the network.
Thank you. So if you aren't familiar with Network, we educate, organize, and lobby for economic, social transformation, and we do that in the form of lobbying for federal policy or different advocacy efforts across the country. And we want to start off our workshop with a prayer, and this is written by Leslie Colvin, one of our board members who is also here at the conference. So say hi to Leslie if you see her walking around. It's called God, Just and Merciful. God, just and merciful, you alone are the Lord of justice and mercy. We turn to you. Throughout time, your children have cried out to you in seeking mercy amidst injustice. We know the movement of your hand as it calms the waters, steadies the step, and illumines the path through difficult journeys.
God, just and merciful, we turn to you. Clear our vision, Lord.
Your son, Jesus of Nazareth, stood before a cross, knowing the assault of lies, the weight of shackles, the sting of scourging, the absence of respect, the pains of exhaustion, the judgment of unjust systems, the apathy of others.
God, just and merciful, we turn to you. Encourage our hearts, Lord.
For generations, your children of color have stood before crosses in this land, nurtured by their blood and tears. Their descendants know the assault of health disparities, the weight of redlining, the sting of hiring discrimination, the absence of fair housing, the pangs of rights denied, the judgment of unjust wages, the apathy of many.
God, just and merciful, we turn to you. Guide our steps, Lord.
Our nation's original sin is a complex web of crosses built on the idols of racism and white privilege. Until this painful and shameful past is reconciled, tomorrow will be as today.
God, just and merciful, we turn to you. Inspire our actions, Lord.
Dismantling these idols requires the change of hearts, minds, laws, and practices. May this arduous task be rooted in your justice and mercy.
God, just and merciful, we turn to you. Heal our nation, Lord.
Amen. So, again, this is the Racial Wealth and Income Gap Workshop. We're going to be tackling some complex and maybe difficult topics and situations today. So we just want to introduce these racial justice shared agreements before we get started, and so we can have a fruitful time here together. So the first one is speak up and make space. So in your group, if you're someone who normally might not speak in a group, try to speak up where you can, where you feel comfortable, where you feel called. And if you're someone who likes to speak a lot, maybe make some space and take a step back and let others participate. We are each experts on our own experiences. So with this one, maybe you've heard it as try to speak in I statements. You can only tell your story. Try not to tell the stories of other people because you don't know if they feel comfortable bringing that into a space with someone they don't know. And just try to speak to your own experience. Respect confidentiality and continue the conversation. So what's said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here. People might be saying some very vulnerable things in your small group conversations. Respect the confidentiality and vulnerability of that, but take what you learned from that and take it out of the space. Whether or not it has been named, the personal manifestations of power are present. Whether that's racial power, economic power, etc., those are all present in the room, so just acknowledging that. Practice self-care. Again, this might be a difficult thing for some people. Do what you need to do. If you need to step outside, take a drink of water, get up and stretch, do whatever you need to do. Embrace and express discomfort. We can't learn unless we live in those tough, hard to navigate spaces, so just knowing that's all part of the process, and that's okay. And resolution will not happen today. We will not solve the racial wealth and income gap today, unfortunately, in this workshop. So there's a lot we can learn to take action, but it won't happen all today. And make space for evaluation of progress and tension. So just allowing yourself to feel what you're feeling in the moment. Can we all agree on these shared agreements?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. So, could someone describe the difference between wealth versus income?
Wealth is assets that you have. Income is assets that are coming into you every year.
Yeah, so if you didn't hear it, wealth are assets that you have. Income is assets that are coming into you that you gain. It's pretty good definition. Anyone else?
Well, isn't there an aspect of wealth too that it has to do with maybe where you come from and where you're likely projected to head, based on like family wealth and inherited property and things like that?
Absolutely. So what she said was wealth has a lot to do with where you come from and what you inherit, and your position in society.
Or what you're likely to inherit.
Or what you're likely to inherit. Yes, that is key. Anyone else?
I think because of a person's maybe class, there's also a limitation on wealth versus income, So a person who is of a very poor background doesn't really have any access to wealth. They're fortunate if they can get an income.
True.
Yeah, so all of that is correct. Colin, do you want to throw up the definition? So here's some baseline definitions breaking down the difference between wealth versus income. So like you said, income is money that you receive or is earned on a continuous basis. Wealth is something that is accumulated throughout your life, whether it's money or other valuable possession. Income is the flow of money. Wealth is a stock of assets. Income is generated immediately. Wealth is created over time. And so an example of income would be wages or salaries from job, interest from savings. An example of wealth would be stocks, bonds, ownership of property, or fine art. Do these definitions make sense to everyone, the difference between? Okay, cool. And so basic top line, income is a stream that helps in the creation of wealth. Wealth is what you have minus what you owe.
All right. So we share these definitions because they're important to keep in mind as we go into our activity today. And we'll be looking at the difference in wealth generation and income generation for these 4 different families that we're going to follow through in a simulation. So we're going to begin this experience of the racial wealth and income gap. But before we do, I just want to make sure we're all prepped for that. So if I can actually have, ma'am, I know you just got here. Would you be able to move to maybe this table or this table right here? Just so that you're joined in for a small group, because we need everyone in groups of 4 or less. But it looks like everyone can divide out into groups of 3 or 4. In the back, if you all stay there, we can do 2 groups, 3 and 3. And then that way we can work that way. And then that way here we have 4 and 4. That's perfect. Here it looks like you could divide into 3 and 3. That would work. 4 and 4. Perfect. Great. So the way that this is going to work, this is a simulation where you're going to follow 4 families, and it's 2 black families and 2 white families. And you're going to follow them throughout the history of over 250 years of U.S. federal policy. As we go through each of these policies, we're going to see how each of them affect our 4 families in their capacity to generate income and in their capacity to generate wealth as well. And hi, my friends, if you all can come up right here to these 2 chairs. Perfect. So these little pouches that you all will receive, or you already have at your tables to divide amongst your groups of 4, are going to guide you through the experience. So you each will be going through that experience at your own pace with your small group. A couple of the items that we have here. When you open up the pouch, you're going to have first, in the big pocket, you're going to have a set of 13 policy cards and 1 set of questions. This is going to be the cards that guide you through the experience at your own pace with your small group. It includes a policy that you'll be reading starting at the beginning of our country's founding, all the way through to policies that affect us in the modern day as well. You'll dedicate 1 person, you can popcorn read throughout, have each person in your group read a different one, but you'll read a description of each policy. Once you finish that description, there are some action items that you will then take depending on which family you've chosen to follow through this experience. The way you're going to choose a family is using the 4 identity cards, which are in the smaller pocket. And those are small cards that say white and black on it. There's 4, so you would pick between those. And that way, in your group, you would choose that identity to follow through this activity today. You'd be either one of the 2 white families or one of the 2 black families to follow through this experience. If you're in a group of 3, 1 person can take on both of the white families, right? And then throughout there, you'll have the other cards that you'll use during the actions. We have money cards, we have land cards, and we have lost opportunity cards. Each of these will be passed along to each family depending on how each policy affects each of your families. So this will be how you progress through each of these 12 federal policies to see how each of them affect the wealth generation and income generation of each of the families that you're simulating through this experience. So with that, I'm going to first allow you all to get into your small groups, again of 4 and or 3 if that's the case, and then you'll be able to pick those.
Yeah, so it'd be a 4. And then the break's right there.
Heather, you're part of our group.
But I'm open to learning, and I'm open to being in these communities where I am.
So invite everyone to come back in.
Even though in the
whole country. I'm not a minority, but in
I
that
hope-
little community I am.
The simulation was helpful, enlightening. I hope the smaller discussions went well as well. What I want to do now actually is transition us into a time of large group debrief to share a little bit from this experience of all of us going through this together. So, as an overview, this is a graphic overview of what the outcome should be after these 12 federal policies. We actually do have them counted out between both all four of our families. And we can see that our first Black family ended with 1 money card and 26 lost opportunity cards. Our second Black family ended with 26 lost opportunity cards and no land or money cards. Our first white family ended with 20 money cards, 14 land cards, and 0 lost opportunity cards. And our second white family ended with 15 money cards, 9 land cards, and 2 lost opportunity cards. So again, this idea of lost opportunity as well, just to clarify, there are things like job prospects, are things like connections, are things like upward mobility. It encompasses a broad swath of things, lives, family members that are all included in what we mean by this. But what I want us to do is to share a little bit in a large group about what this experience was like. You can use some of the discussion questions that we had to guide your sharing, or you could just share maybe what the experience or reaction was from going through that. But before we dive into a large group debrief, I would like to remind us once again of our racial justice shared agreements. These are just agreements for all of us, as we talked about in the beginning, to have a common ground of understanding so we can have productive and fruitful conversation and dialogue, right? So a quick rundown once again of these that are here, and invite us all to share from this space of our racial justice shared agreements. So with that, we had 10 questions. It's okay if you didn't get to all 10, but if you'd like to use these questions as a starting point for a sharing that you have, we invite you to do that. Or if you'd like to just share of what your experience was, we'd be more than happy to hear that as well. Audrey's going to be walking around with a microphone, so if you have something to share, you can just raise a hand and Audrey can come to you. But at this time, we'll open it up, and we'd love to hear a little bit about some sharing from you all that went through the experience just now.
I'll get right to the point. This should be a mandatory workshop. Everyone who attends should participate in this workshop before they go anywhere else or hear anything else, because you really don't understand the essence of what we're trying to do in racial justice unless you have experienced this, because this is real. This is not a game. This is exactly what happens in our society today. And I want this game. I want to be able to buy this, because we need to do
Someone have any other questions?
No, I was just...
Oh, I'm gonna try switching out the mic.
Yeah, I think we should continue with that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Very much appreciate you sharing from there. We'd love to open it up to anyone else who has thoughts, like to share as well.
I'd like to comment that, this mic works. I'd like to comment that, and my teammates will verify this, that I psychologically, I kind of like wanted to be white. You know what I mean? Because I saw the benefits in black and white, of what it meant to be white. And of course, we're all adults here, and we most of us know better, but it's almost like what's lost in all that is that it's not a natural right. It's not a natural right to these privileges, but in my child's mind, it feels that way to me. It feels that I don't have these privileges because I'm black, not because of an inequitable system.
And
Thank you so much.
okay, so I was the Black family that came out rock bottom, and emotionally the impact it had on me was like, I hope we can just finally get through these cards, because it's like I'm getting worn out. You know, every time I try to stand up, you know, you get a little land card, or you get happy because you get a little thing, and then the next thing, a new law comes around, and boom, your legs are kicked out from under you. And it was overwhelming and exhausting, and I wanted the game to be over because I didn't think I could take it anymore. And so, yeah, it was really the emotional impact of being beat down.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, as a quick side story, I know in the back, Audrey, we had someone that had their hand up, and then we'll jump to the other hands. But just as a quick side story, when I gave this workshop about 2 months ago to a group of young girls in a leadership camp in Michigan, and I remember as we were going through, there was this one young woman that was going through the cards. She had one of the white families, and I think it was probably they had to transfer some money to her. She was like, "No, please do not give me any more right now. Like, I do not want to receive more of this right now." But I just wanted to echo that. Thank you for sharing.
I just wanted to say that I chose the black card. Now, obviously, I'm white, and the reason why is I knew a lot of that intellectually, the experience of people of color. But I think this exercise for a white person to choose a black card really gets it from your head to, you know, really live the reality in your heart, and hopefully lead you to some kind of action.
Thank you.
Just tell people to play. Choose against your situation.
I wanted to say what Patricia had brought up. She said that black people don't accumulate wealth because they're always helping each other. Something like that, okay. And I had to tell her about an experience I had. I'm with the American Red Cross, and I respond to fires. And I did a fire back in October that ended up with at least 28 homeless people and 13 homeless children in 2 fatalities. It was the most heartbreaking fire I've ever had to respond to. My job is to go in, get the information, and then hand people a credit card so they can at least go to a hotel. So if you ever go to the Red Cross, that's where the money goes. But what I'm trying to say is this fire started because the one apartment building, it was all immigrants. It was almost totally immigrants. They weren't black, but they were people of color who were trying, you know, this group was trying to help that group. The fire was so bad that it affected next door, which was another jam-packed building of immigrants. And when I walked in, I said, "Tell me, how were the smoke alarms?" And they said, "No smoke alarms." That's another thing I do, is help install smoke alarms. But it was so heartbreaking to see how these people were trying to help these other people, and this terrible fire, and all of these people, you know, how they were affected.
First, my name is Vladimir. I pick up the white people, even I'm black, because when I moved in America as a Asian immigrant, I live in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So what they consider like a black area. And then I said, why the white people has more opportunities than the black people here? So that's why I pick up the white. So I want to know what policy apply for them and not apply for the black. And I realized that they got more money, more lands, and only 2 lost opportunities. When the black people get 1 land or 1 money card, the white people, they got twice. So there was a big separation. The white people get more, when the black people, they keep losing. And I can give you an experience. When I like I told you, I moved from Haiti in Haiti, I used to work for the president, and I am like at the high class of Haiti, received good education. So when I moved to Bridgeport, and then there was one thing that frustrated me. Everywhere they have alcohol stores. They have where they sell drugs. They sell everything because the black community. When you went to the white community, you cannot find any alcohol store just at each block because I work in Westport and now I work in Southport. Those areas, if you live in, for example, here, to find a liquor store, you have to drive like 10 miles or 20 miles before you find a liquor store. In the black community, you're just like that. Just like that. At each corner you find one. And there is a place where I used to bring my kids to have ice cream. They sell it. You know what they put there as a store? A smoke store where people can come and buy smoke and cigarette and everything like that. All kind of smoking. So I moved. Thanks God, I have a problem with the landlord and the building. So I decided to move to Fairfield to be close to my job. I arrived to Fairfield. My insurance go down. So I pay less on my car insurance. I got more opportunity because I live in an area that if Fairfield is considered like a right neighborhood. So I got more opportunity just because 5 minutes away I move. So I decided, why is that? Why you should have this discrimination? And I can tell you, if you are a white person, you work in Greenwich as a housekeeper, and you are making $15 an hour, you will get approved for a mortgage loan like more than $600,000 just because you are white and you live in Greenwich, you work in Greenwich. If you are a black man or a black female, you live in Bridgeport, and you are a nurse, you are making $25 an hour, you won't qualify for $300,000 for mortgage because they consider you as a high risk. It's not fair.
No, it isn't.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We have time for maybe two more, and then we want to get to some of our final pieces to call to action as well.
One of the things that struck me most about this is that, particularly in our society, we have a very short-term memory, and we often don't recognize the historical impacts of things that have come before us. So oftentimes we will be living in our communities and we'll say they're so diverse and we've got a lot of different people, but we don't necessarily recognize the impacts of the policies that have gone before us. And I think that's something that's really important to recognize because those are things that are continuing to impact people today. And oftentimes people who like to say, oh, we're past that, we don't see race, or we're not a racist society, I don't think they're recognizing the number of lost opportunities that so many people have. And I think this is like a very good, tangible way of seeing that, right? It's a tangible way of actually seeing that, and also recognizing, someone had mentioned before, the psychological impacts as well, and that's something to keep in mind. So I really appreciate this.
We could do one more.
I think I saw this name.
I think this is an excellent exercise because it really brings to the forefront what the injustices have been. Because there's a lot of hearsay and talk. And lots of times I hear people say, well, I don't know why those people can't pull themselves by the bootstraps, right? Why they can't do well in school, get a good job, get a good house? Why are they all involved with drugs and everything? And then this exercise, shows you, they're at a setback. Not only don't they have any access to wealth, but they have poor education. They don't have access to living in a good neighborhood, Their neighborhood is surrounded by alcohol and drugs, right? And that sometimes, people will look the other way if it's a white person, but not if they're a person of color. But the other thing I was sharing in my group as a minor point was that even when you do have the minimum wage in certain fields, if people of color in those fields, it doesn't mean that they're enforced. So when I was in high school, college, we worked at the sweatshops. We got paid by the piece, even though it was a union shop. Because if we spoke up, we would have lost our jobs, right? And myself, I was just a high school college student, so I spoke English. But there was people there who were immigrants. If they spoke up, they would have lost their job. They have no other source of income. So even in a union shop, it's not always fair if you're a person of color.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience. Yeah, no, and thank you all for the sharing of your experience of this process for our racial wealth and income gap. And I keep saying experience, but they experience the interactive activity that we do. As a quick plug before we dive, because I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the themes that were brought up, things like redlining, things like unjust application of a law that might on the surface be good, but the application of it does not fall evenly among communities, right? So I want to dive into that a little bit more. But before that, just as a quick plug, this is one of our most popular workshops at Network. And we actually have a facilitator's guide, where if this was transformative for you, if this was something that you want to bring to a community comes to mind where you'd like to share this experience as well, we have this available where you can have a facilitator's guide that tells you how you can run this one, where you can have a download of all the activity cards as well, and where you can run this either in an in-person group, the way we're doing it now, or even in a virtual group, which is what we had to transition to do as well during the pandemic. So both are available. We have our facilitator guides available for free. You can take one of them. We are in the exhibit hall in the back corner. But if you find us there, we'll be happy to hand you one of these. You can sign up if you aren't signed up yet for Network's mailings, and we can send you some of the downloads to use this as well. But again, what is said here stays here, but what is learned here leaves, right? And if we can take what we've learned out to others as well, that's one of the most powerful tools that we can do. So these are available as a quick plug, the facilitator guides at the Network lobby booth in the exhibit hall. We're in the very back corner. You should find us there afterwards. But to dive in a little bit more with the final few minutes that we have left. This is a chart of the disparities in net wealth among non-white families, white families, and black families, as well as Hispanic families. They're colored differently. This is from when they first started measuring this in 1963, all the way to the most recent numbers that we were able to receive, which is from 2019. This is the median family wealth. So if anyone here is good at math, I know I'm not really good at math, but we know that median takes out those big outliers at the ends and gives you a little bit more of a true figure of what we have. And when we look at median family wealth, that blue line is the median family wealth of white families, which is $188,200. If we're to look at the yellow line, which is towards the very bottom, we see that in 2019, the median wealth for black families was $24,100. That is almost an 8 times difference. And this is in 2019 before COVID-19 pandemic, right? Which at this point has ballooned this to a much greater extent, and that we're waiting to see what the actual effect was in wealth building capacity. So again, this isn't about income generation. This isn't how much someone makes in a year. This is how much wealth a family has, the assets that they own that has that type of value that oftentimes is passed over a long period of time as well.
Assets minus debt.
Assets minus debt, exactly. So we see that here in the most recent numbers that the current state of affairs is there's a massive wealth gap among families in races. And we see that this happens for various reasons. Now, a little bit of a quiz, so I'd love to get your responses here. But I'd love to test everyone here. What do you believe is the single largest driver of that racial wealth gap that we just saw? Do you think it's A, inequities in education, B, inequities in home ownership, or C, inequities in income? So I'll ask you, all you gotta do is raise a hand, but if you think it's A, inequities in education, raise a hand for A, inequities in education. If you think it's B, inequities in home ownership, raise a hand. And if you think it's C, inequities in income, raise a hand. Okay, excellent. So the answer is, drum roll, B, inequities in home ownership. Now, each of these factors contribute to the racial wealth gap, to be sure. But the single largest driver is the inequity in home ownership. In our country, the way wealth is built and the way wealth is passed down is mainly through home ownership. Ownership of land, of some type of business, of a home, of any kind of condo, right? That is the main way that wealth is built among families and passed down along through families as well. So when policies passed by that limit the access of folks to gain home ownership, whether in terms of how much income they can get to qualify, what type of neighborhoods banks are allowed to lend in, who's actually given the right to receive a loan, right? Or the type of value that a neighborhood receives based on how it's graded. That automatically limits the wealth building capacity of many families. So we look at home ownership specifically in our country as the single largest driver, even though all of them do have an effect. So we see the cyclical nature of how that starts with an initial inequity that starts to maybe one of those policies that we read, which leads to lower income, lower assets, lower ability to be able to move ahead, which leads to lower capital formation. The assets that you own that gain value versus things like a car that you purchase but loses value, or things like anything else that you might purchase that will lose value. The capital assets that you're able to gain, you have a low access to as well, which leads to lower capacity to generate income, all multiplied by things like an unequal tax system leads to debt and further loss of income, which continues that spiral all the way through. Now, it was mentioned earlier the idea of the different types of neighborhoods and the vast experiences you can have being 5 minutes from one neighborhood to another. Housing discrimination is an important piece that we need to acknowledge when we talk about how wealth is built. Owning a home is not as easy as just purchasing or applying for a loan or for a mortgage, because we know that the way that neighborhoods have been zoned, have been chosen to be where are places where liquor stores can be built, where are places where there is a limit of how many liquor stores or how many smoke shops that there can be built in a certain neighborhood. But in other places, it's free reign to open up as many as you'd like, right? Where you can open 3 liquor stores, but there hasn't been a new grocery store in 15 years, right? Or a new hospital in your area. And we see that through this idea of housing discrimination, specifically in what was known as this socially acceptable form of racism that went all through the 1960s, known as redlining, where banks would go through on a map and they would circle areas that they considered high risk, a bad credit risk, that if anyone invested in these communities, you would lose money on that type of investment. And that correlated very directly with race in those types of areas. Here we have a residential security map. It shows a little bit of an index of the different colors, where you'd give the grade A all the way to the grade D, going from the green all the way to the red, which included the grade D. And we see that many neighborhoods were carved up, especially after the desegregation in our country, the communities started being integrated. We saw that many neighborhoods were just carved up through these redlining policies that really affected who received what type of funding, who received what type of opportunities, who received lower insurance payments depending on where you live, what type of schools are available to you depending on where you live, right, depending on your zip code. Since we're in Washington, D.C., network is based out of Washington, D.C. This is the diamond of what D.C. originally was. Here we have the Potomac River and then Anacostia. So on this side, this is Virginia, this is actually D.C. right here. This is not colored, but this is a 1937 map of community zoning. The darker areas were considered the higher grade, grade A areas. The lighter areas are considered the lower grade areas. So this is an actual map from 1937 of the Washington, D.C. area. We can see, if anyone knows the D.C. area, those darker areas are in places like Georgetown, or in places like Northwest D.C., which if anyone knows, there's plenty of space, there's lots of trees, you have homes that have an actual backyard and a front yard. A very big area, but it's also a wealthier area and very much overwhelmingly a white area. Compared to the other areas that are lighter, where if you were to superimpose that onto the current racial makeup of what DC looks like, you start to see that this correlates very specifically with the racial makeup of each of these neighborhoods as well, to this day. Something that started back in 1937. You can find community zoning maps for any community, any major city. So depending on where you're from, if it's maybe in Florida or in Ohio or in California, you can find these residential zoning maps that are public knowledge and are available. And it's a curious thing to have those be superimposed as to what the current makeup of that area is now, which really affects where people move to and what opportunities are available in each of those neighborhoods. So we see that the lasting impact of redlining and how it disproportionately affects Black residents. We see that those grade D neighborhoods shot up in the 1970s and on, and how if you're a Black resident, you are more likely to live in one of those grade D redlined neighborhoods. Now, that is not, redlining is not technically legal today, but the effects of it and the effects of the type of investments that folks have an appetite to invest in are still very real in affecting those neighborhoods today. So as we see, the influence of redlining in all these neighborhoods cause many different things, like intentionally segregating neighborhoods. This affects things like the school quality that is available. I think we can, know that depending on your zip code that you live in, it really depends what type of education you receive, what type of funding you receive there. Lack of quality healthcare and nutrition, things like grocery stores and hospitals are usually built in specific areas. Inadequate public transportation, we see things like the Federal Highway Act, where these highway systems were built, oftentimes directly through these Black and brown neighborhoods, displacing many people or cutting them off from various public services and needs. We see limited economic opportunity, leading to folks having to find non-traditional sources of income, and add to all that the question of gentrification and how that prices out folks that have currently lived in areas that really they were only pushed to anyways. So when you look at this final chart, to me this is one of the most startling ones, is the idea of homeownership by race. And this is again from 1960 all the way through to 2019, the most recent numbers that we could find, from the Urban Institute. What is surprising to me is how little this graph has changed. And we see that the home ownership really has not changed much, even though there's been, in that time, over some 60 years of federal policy, but how little effect it actually has had in the home ownership rates among different racial families. And the issue here is, obviously, this is an experience that is difficult because it highlights and it puts a spotlight on some very tough realities of how things are based off of previous policies that were very intentionally made so, right? But as one of our previous executive directors, Sister Simone Campbell, who also won a Presidential Medal of Freedom recently, we're just super excited about, she would always say that even though it's policy that got us into the current situation that we're in right now, policy is what can get us out of that situation. And that's what Network tries to do in advocating for federal policies, and specifically our current policy agenda that we're focused on. And I'll pass it over to Audrey to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so our policy agenda at Network is called the Build Anew Agenda. So the idea to kind of come up with the name Build Anew is like, this system is not working. So we need to dismantle it and build something new where everyone can thrive. And so when we're laying the foundation for that new system, we lay it on these 4 cornerstones: dismantling systemic racism, cultivating inclusive community, rooting our economy in solidarity, and transforming our politics. And at Network, we're a huge fan of Pope Francis, and so we have this quote down here. Pope Francis says, "Hope would have us recognize that there is always a way out, that we can always redirect our steps, that we can always do something to solve our problems." So that's kind of our hope to take action. And so within those 4 cornerstones, these are the policy areas that we focus on. So economic security, healthcare, housing and food, taxes, democracy, and immigration and justice systems. So those are all the issues that we want to build anew: prioritizing racial equity, caring for the earth, and improving the well-being of all people in communities. And we can do that through legislative advocacy.
If any of these issues, this isn't a proportional pie chart, so things switch based off what the political winds are, obviously, right? But if any of these are something that sparks interest in you or something that you are passionate about, please come see us at our booth. We have resources for education on each of these topics, and importantly, we have issues on action, ways that you can take action after learning about these issues so that you can take that into your community as well to make a change, especially at that federal level. So we have plenty of resources on each of these, including these facilitator guides for the racial wealth and income gap that you can take to your communities to share as well. We always invite folks to connect with us, and if you aren't receiving any of our information yet, an easy way to sign up is always through text. We invite folks to text the word justice to this very long number, but it's 202-347-9797. You can take a picture if you like, or you could just see us at our booth at the exhibitor hall, and we can sign you up to receive any of our action alerts. This is a very critical time, especially going into a midterm elections, making sure that we're advocating for policies that truly help all folks, right? So with this, we want to thank you all for taking the time to be with us. This basic information on what the racial wealth gap looks like, what are the processes that add to what it is, and what we can do to help on those issues. We have plenty of sources that are available that you can check out from those, especially in our facilitator's guide. And again, we invite you to connect with us out at the exhibitor hall. We're in the back corner. We'd love to have a conversation with you and connect you to any of these advocacy opportunities. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us as well. But we thank you for spending this time with us.
You know, what I wanted to say,